I am here before you today not just to give a speech, but to tell a story. A story about doors rather than walls. When you think of walls, you think of barriers. Walls restrict, they isolate, they divide, they imprison. I think of the Berlin Wall that physically separated East from West. I think of the prison cell that kept Nelson Mandela locked away for 26 years on Robben Island. But when you think of doors, on the other hand, you think of passageways. You think of doors opening to new horizons, new opportunities, to new ideas. I think of the iconic image of Ronald Reagan standing next to the Berlin Wall, proclaiming, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." I think of the image of Nelson Mandela leaving Robben Island, freedom fist waving in the air, proclaiming Amandla, the Xhosa word for freedom, power. When it comes to economic development in rising or emerging markets, or for that matter, families investing their private capital, there is, unfortunately, more walls and fewer doors. I would like to talk about some of these walls that block economic development in rising markets and also block returns and impact associated with certain kinds of family investments. In emerging or rising markets, perhaps the single greatest wall to economic development, the creation of jobs, is philanthropy. As well-intentioned as it may be, and although philanthropy performs certain critical and noble purposes in civil society, it often creates dependencies rather than independence that is really needed to lift people out of poverty over the longer term. In fact, as many of you know, the etymology of the word philanthropy, which links to the Latin and Greek words phil, or love, and anthropos, or anthropia, meaning of humankind, thus love of humankind, connotes that philanthropy is about relieving pain and suffering. It's about helping, as civil society should, in places where free markets don't operate. It is not about creating jobs. But philanthropy is not the only activity that represents a wall. The typical private equity model also represents a wall. Like philanthropy, the typical PE model has many noble and commendable purposes and functions. It represents an asset class that allows investors to earn a return after capital is deployed, typically in fewer than 5 years, and returned in typically fewer than 10 years. Liquidity is important, as it should be, to many investors. The PE model is also built on a for-profit incentive platform that rewards high performance, top returns, attracts top talent, encourages innovation, and encourages reasonable risk-taking. Yet, it has walls. In many emerging or rising markets, holding an asset for only about 4 years, which is the average holding period, for example, in the continent of Africa for private equity investors, is just not optimal for growing transformative companies, and hence not optimal for top returns and top impact. Capital deployed in an overly short-term fashion that is put in and taken out in just a few years and fund incentives that are structured to encourage short-term liquidity. It's just not optimal for building transformative businesses. As a result, in the typical model, decisions are sometimes made for short-term gain, not long-term value creation. I call this the wall of time. In addition, the PE model sees no involvement from limited partners. Investors are silent. Money is invested and money is returned, period. But what companies need is to leverage the relationships of industry leaders, including, where appropriate, limited partners. I call this second wall the relationship wall. Further, companies and entrepreneurs need insights. They need skills. They need best practices that seasoned companies have honed, sometimes over decades. Many influential families who invest in typical private equity funds, including some in this very room today, have incredible intellectual capital, incredible relationships and insights that could be highly accretive to portfolio investee companies. But these are not harnessed through the typical private equity model. I call this the intellect wall. Today I'm here to tell you that leading families from around the world hold the keys that can unlock doors through these walls. We at 1001 Voices are on a mission. We're on a mission to build through these walls doorways of patient financial capital, of relational capital, and of intellectual capital. We call it three-dimensional capital, enabling us to open doors to a new model of economic freedom, starting in sub-Saharan Africa and expanding ultimately to rising markets around the world. Now, economic freedom, it's a formidable term. It evokes emotions such as empowerment, emotions such as independence, such as hope, and such as dignity. We are most focused on opening the door to economic freedom for millions of people across the African continent, enabling them to successfully pass through the threshold and face the opportunities that lie ahead. Now, I would like to take this to a personal level for a minute. In my own life, the doors that have opened have led to opportunities that have had profound effects on my life and the life of my family. So you may be able to tell from my accent, I was raised in the Republic of South Africa. My family and I lived in a small mining town. I didn't speak much English growing up, as Afrikaans was my home language. When I was 13, my parents sent me to an English boarding school. This opened my eyes to new cultures, gave me independence, and gave me the confidence to move more freely across different cultures and different worlds. A second door opened in my life when I came to the United States, actually on a tennis scholarship, to play at Southern Methodist University. This opened the doors to an American education, which ultimately resulted in me running the private equity and buyouts practice as a M&A and private equity attorney at one of the largest law firms in the world. Perhaps most profoundly, a third door opened in my life more recently. And that happened when a longtime friend introduced me to a gentleman called John Coors. The Coors family had a very powerful story based on 26 years, or approximately 20 years, of both for-profit and non-profit activities in the continent of Africa. What they concluded with regard to their philanthropic activities was that they were not making a powerful and a meaningful and a lasting impact, lifting people out of poverty and advancing economic freedom. In fact, after feeding, clothing, caring for, and educating orphans in Africa, in Kenya in particular, John and his family watched as they graduated from high school and could not find suitable jobs to begin the next chapter in their lives. As he stated, this made him both very sad and very mad. His philanthropy, as well-intentioned as it was creating more walls. So John and his family came to a conclusion. Philanthropy is not the right tool for business growth and job creation. Private investment, done right, is. Within 2 minutes of meeting John, I could feel the doors opening to a new opportunity. Perhaps the biggest opportunity in my life. On the other side was what we now call a new model for economic freedom. I could see, I could feel, I could touch how it could work. I had spent 16 years working in private equity transactions, complex cross-border M&A, cross-border financing, running consistently into walls. The new vision was so compelling to me that I left my career as head of the PE practice at a large law firm to lead what is now 1001 Voices. Our movement was born a little over a year ago, 7,800 miles from here, at the foot of Table Mountain in Cape Town, South Africa, at the World Economic Forum on Africa. In just over a year, we've assembled a team with over 85 years of collective investment experience in private equity and M&A. We've opened offices in Johannesburg, London, Mauritius, and Denver. Our team has evaluated over 100 potential opportunities. We've signed over 50 NDAs, and we're actively negotiating term sheets on transactions. Our movement has begun, and I'm incredibly excited about the opportunity to create economic freedom. And I want to share a little bit more about how that is going to look and is beginning to look at this point in time. Core to this model is three-dimensional capital. Our mission at 1001 Voices is to accelerate prosperity, to advance economic freedom in rising markets starting in sub-Saharan Africa. But what does this mean, and how do we intend to achieve it? Put simply, we are transforming the traditional private equity model as we know it today. When you think of private equity in a traditional sense, you think of one-dimensional capital. You think of money, financial capital, invested in what I call a short-term, 10-year fund life, 5-year investment period. There are a couple of factors that significantly differentiate 1001 Voices. The first is that our investors are comprised exclusively of influential families from key geographies and key industries around the globe. These families are hand-selected to bring value that is accretive to both the fund and the portfolio companies, as well as to the community of families themselves. The second differentiator is that we offer more than just money to companies in which we invest. Each family is involved with 1001 Voices through bringing expertise and relationships in key industries accretive to the fund and to the portfolio companies. Most of our families are business leaders themselves or have been part of families that have succeeded oftentimes over generations. These families also have connections, oftentimes globally, that they're able to leverage for the benefit of the community and the investee companies. For us, this all comes together in three-dimensional capital, which encompass intellectual capital, the business acumen, the know-how, and the business insights that families can bring, relational capital, relationships form the core of business, the connections that families can bring, and then finally, patient financial capital. Within this model, the patient financial capital is something that has resonated with many people, including our family investors and also with sub-Saharan African companies with which we're in conversation. We like to describe patient financial capital as money without an expiration date, money with a longer time horizon. While traditional private equity funds typically exit a transaction in 5 to 10 years, oftentimes 4 years or less, we can stay invested as long as is required. While we expect, in many cases, to hold investments only slightly longer than typical funds may hold investments, the ability to hold an asset as long as is needed gives a huge competitive advantage. It opens our deal aperture to all kinds of different investment opportunities. And it allows us to make decisions in the best interests of the company over a long period of time, driving higher returns, reduced risk, and greater impact. Stated differently, the ability to be patient, where patience is required, is a competitive advantage that influential families have, as they generally have lower liquidity needs than, say, pension funds or perhaps families of less means. That we're leveraging this competitive advantage for higher returns, greater impact, and lower risk. Businesses often require both investment and time in order to grow and realize their full potential. And that is precisely what we seek to provide. I'd like to share just briefly a conversation we recently had with a CEO of a family-held business in Africa. This is a company doing just south of 10 million in EBITDA. It's part of a larger family enterprise that is spinning off significant cash flow. This is a company that has been approached by a series of investors. And consistently, the response has been, we don't need the money. Money's green. We've got plenty of it. When we had the conversation with them, however, what really appealed to them was partnering with other families. Long before corporations existed, families existed. Families partnering with leading families that can drive significant value above and beyond money, can provide relationships and insights that can help their company grow and blossom and prosper. That appealed to them. So the model is resonating, we're noticing across the African continent. Our community of investing families is also carefully designed to drive more than just top returns and impact through three-dimensional capital. We are designed to offer significant, unpromoted co-investment opportunities to families, as well as unpromoted deal flow among the family members themselves. We are also carefully designed to involve the next generation of our family members in our fund and in our portfolio companies. To our knowledge, this is the first of its effort of its kind of any private investment fund anywhere in the world at this level. The community that we've created and that we're growing of families, the intimacy that exists within it, is the glue that holds together 1,001 voices. Now, McKinsey reports that 60% of the world's wealth is controlled by approximately 5,000 families. I believe that a movement of leading families aligned around values-based free enterprise can be a transformative force to open many new doors by creating new jobs and advancing economic freedom. Why Africa? I've spoken quite a bit up until this point about sub-Saharan Africa. It's the region in which 1001 Voices will make its initial investment. It's a region that I am personally incredibly excited about. And it's also closely tied to my personal past, my present, and my future. One way of telling Africa's current growth story is simply through numbers. Numbers that open a door of opportunity for families seeking the confluence of both top returns and top impact. First, favorable macroeconomics. You may not know this, but by 2050, Africa's GDP is projected to be larger in today's dollars than the United States and Europe combined. Africa is also projected to have 9 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world between 2010 and 2020. Sub-Saharan Africa is projected to experience sustained real GDP growth that is second only to developing Asia, approximately 6%. More, stability. Only 3 democracies existed in Sub-Saharan Africa immediately post-Cold War. Today, there are 25. Only 4 countries out of the approximately 55 comprising Africa today lack multi-party constitutions. There were 22 elections held in 2012. Recent developments, such as the elections in Kenya, demonstrate that increasingly Africans are taking to the voting booth as a way to peacefully transition power. And it's spreading across the continent, in part due to the great leadership you're seeing from Presidents Kagame and others across the African continent. Next, favorable demographics. Africa has the world's fastest growing population and will soon have the world's largest workforce. It will be larger than China by 2035. And by 2050, Africans will have 25% of the world's workforce. Africa also has the world's youngest population, with more than half of its inhabitants under the age of 20. Africa is expected to experience a large decline in what is referred to as the dependency ratio, the number of children and elderly being supported by each worker. And this comes at a time, I'll add, that the dependency ratio in many other parts of the world is actually moving in the opposite direction. There's also an incredibly exciting story about a growing middle class in Africa. More than half of African households are projected to have discretionary income by 2020. Private consumption in Africa is greater than India and Russia. Now is an incredibly exciting time in Africa. You know, they say that 10, 20 years ago, many American families wanted their children to learn Mandarin. Many still do. But increasingly, today, American families are teaching their children about Africa. Against all the compelling data on Africa, there is a wall of substantial poverty, unemployment, and undercapitalization in the continent. Yet the confluence of opportunity and need in Africa creates a door on the other side of which is both top returns and significant impact. Leading families with the ability to be more patient and holding immense resources of relational and intellectual capital hold the key that can unlock this door. This is where opportunity resides. This is where the doors can swing open and advance economic freedom in the continent of Africa and other rising markets around the world. Now is the time. The walls are being torn down, and the doors are ready to swing open. Thank you.